Welcome back to Matters of Faith. I'm Christiana Bakker, and with me in the studio is Jonathan Brockopp. We're talking about one of the most misunderstood concepts in Islam, jihad and the sanctity of life. Now, the sanctity of life was very important also for the second caliph of Islam, Omar, when he took over Jerusalem.
That's right. We were talking about the early conquests of the territory around Mecca and Medina. And of course, Jerusalem at that time was a city that was in control of the Byzantine territory. It was between the Byzantine and Persian territory for some time before that. It was a city that was not only of strategic importance, but of course of great religious importance. And the rabbis of the city got together and they said that they would not capitulate to the general who had been in charge of the siege. They would only capitulate to Omar himself. And Omar, as you said, was the second caliph, the second in line who led the Muslim community after the Prophet's death. And so Omar himself then traveled down to Jerusalem, and we are told that there are different stories about coming in on a donkey or on foot, but at any rate he came in a way that was not of overwhelming power. Omar was smart about power. He had power. He didn't need to embarrass the people of Jerusalem. And indeed, because they had capitulated, this fit into that law we were talking about before, that the citizens of Jerusalem were able to maintain their property. And of course, also this included maintaining their way of practicing their faith. They were not Muslims at that point, and they practiced Christianity and Judaism as they had practiced it before the conquest.
Yeah, that's quite unusual, isn't it?
Well, it's unusual in the history of war.
Yes.
That's certainly true. But it's also unusual in terms of our perception of what Muslims are all about and what Muslim warfare is. And this is a story that I'm not just telling you. This is a story that's part of Muslim history. Every Muslim who studies this studies that story of Omar. And in fact, it was known then to Salah ad-Din when he took over Jerusalem again in the year 1187. So Salah ad-Din was the hero of the Crusades on the one side, and Jerusalem had been taken over by Christians, the invading armies coming from Europe at that point in 1099. And that slaughter of the citizens of Jerusalem couldn't have been more different than Omar's capitulation.
There are very strict guidelines for warfare in Islam and also for jihad. And what you just said, an individual just declaring jihad somewhere else actually is not based, does not have a fundament in Islam. I think the rules are that perhaps you can explain to us the rules, in fact, that it has to be declared by the head of state in conjunction with the religious scholars, and it can only be declared, as you said, within the state. One can't declare jihad somewhere completely different in another country.
Right.
It's the fight against oppression and so on and so forth. So just to interject.
That's right. And there were very specific rules, which were not always followed, but they're very clear in the text. And so the taking of this then from a collective duty on the state to an individual duty was something that happened actually as part of the revolutionary 60s. We might have all our own associations with the 1960s as a time of revolution. This revolution maybe wasn't such a positive one because it was one that saw created a way, if you will, for individual Muslims to take on jihad on their own.
Warfare, for example, is again governed by strict rules and is only allowed as a form of defense. Yet other people would see it differently. Could you perhaps, now that we've spoken about jihad, talk a little bit about the different ways of seeing warfare?
Right, and warfare then gets more complicated because on the one hand we have very clear guidelines about certain aspects of war. And
like we've just seen, we've just looked at the Quran before. There was
that's
one
right.
verse in the second chapter, 190, where it says, only fight against the ones who fight against you and do not transgress the bounds.
Correct. And this idea of do not transgress is terribly important. The Quran constantly refers to this idea of those who are on the middle path, if you will, who are on the Sirat al-Mustaqim.
Yeah.
Even in the first surah of the Quran, it talks about this. Guide us along the straight path.
Yes.
And neither to the right, neither to the left, right? This is an idea of a direction that you take that leads then to righteousness.
Yeah, you mentioned the middle way. In fact, it says even in the Quran that it's the religion of the middle way and it's the people of the middle way, so not to transgress any boundaries or not to be extreme, in fact, is very un-Islamic.
That's right. And so when we talk about this idea of the straight path and deviating from that, the Quran refers to those who do corruption in the land. The Quran doesn't just talk about Muslims, it also talks about these non-Muslims who need to change their ways. It's very interested in the morality of people. The words that it uses to talk about this is to exceed the boundaries, to go beyond God's bounds. And that's also an important term in the Quran, the hudud-ullah, the boundaries of God. So to exceed that, and indeed to be an extremist, is to step outside the bounds of what God has intended for his community.
Yeah, basically to go against his commands.
That's right. The very words for justice and injustice in the Quran,
Yeah.
the actual meaning of the Arabic terms is balance
Yeah.
versus exceeding the boundaries.
Yes, yes, in every way.
That's right.
In social situations,
In every way.
health.
Al-Ghazali has a tremendous example that he gives. He talks about God's creation of the human body as being perfectly in order. And it's adl, it's just,
Yes.
in the sense that you have one arm on one side and one arm on the other. You have two eyes, everything is balanced in the face.
Yeah.
And God didn't make it unjust, he didn't make it out of boundaries.
Yeah.
So you take the organization of the human body, indeed the organization of the universe, all as an expression of God's plan for the way that human beings can respond. Of course, it's one of the things about human beings is they can exceed God's bounds. They're the one creature that God created that can do that. Angels may not
Yes.
exceed God's boundaries.
That's right. But we have the free will, so we can decide to go this way or that way.
Indeed.
But also everything has a right, like your body has a right over you, your family has a right over you, and so on and so forth. So that all comes into this just plan for everything, and exceeding even the right of your own body, always you will suffer only yourself.
That's right.
Or develop illness.
There are discussions, for instance, about what Judgment Day will be like, and the Prophet says that your own body will testify against you if you commit a sin against it. So there is that possibility. The body is talked about in the Quran as being a trust from God, something that God has given us for this period of time, and we are to respond to this body as a gift from God.
Yeah, exactly. And so getting back to our subject, not exceeding the bounds, in that verse it says, only fight against those who fight against you.
And so I think we can understand if you blow yourself up, that you're exceeding the bounds of respect for your body, respect for God's bounds.
Yeah, that is one. And the other one is if war is committed upon you, say somebody shoots at you and then you respond or your friend responds with a nuclear bomb, that's also exceeding the bounds, because you're only allowed to fight back as you have been aggressed upon and not go beyond that.
Exactly, that's right. And I think important here is to understand the historical situation of this early Muslim community, because all these verses are taking place within a specific context. And the context was of a community that had been under siege. In fact, they were forced to flee their home, their country, to leave behind family and friends. They were persecuted and then left from their hometown of Mecca and traveled all the way then to a completely different town in Arabia of Medina. So this was a situation you had when the first verses came down to the Quran, from the Quran, came down from God, that allowed fighting in the first place. So for the first 10, 12 years of the existence of this early Muslim community, we don't have any fighting. It's not allowed. The Prophet is told many times, in fact, that do not respond to the various injustices against you. Then in Medina, that's the end. And we start to get then the first allowance of a kind of warfare, as you say, in defense because of the attacks that have been committed against this new Muslim community.
Now, the Prophet himself, he was an example of compassion and mercy. In fact, his character was the Quran. His wife Aisha said, now he led by example. He forgave even his enemies and in fact made friends with them through this forgiveness, these acts of forgiveness and so on. What about his companions?
Well, the Prophet is terribly important for when we try to look for sources for warfare, but the companions are as well. And the reason for this is, first of all, the Prophet's close group of friends, many of them had been with him for years and years. And when the Prophet died in 632, those companions then that outlived him continued on with this new Muslim community in leading it and indeed in making decisions in his stead. So the early Muslim community was very careful about collecting not only the stories about the Prophet, but also stories about his companions. So we have an important statement by Abu Bakr, maybe the Prophet's closest friend, and indeed the man who led the Muslim community after the Prophet's death. And he came out with a list. He says, I advise you 10 things, particularly on warfare. And there are 10 specific restrictions on what Muslims should not do in warfare.
Let me read those to you.
You have them.
We have them. Do not commit treachery or deviate from the right path. Don't attack an inhabited building. You must not mutilate dead bodies. Neither kill a child, nor a woman, nor an aged man. Bring no harm to the trees, nor burn them with fire, especially those which are fruitful. Slay not any of the enemy's flocks, except for your food. You are likely to pass by people who have devoted their lives to monastic services. Leave them alone. I think we should close our show on a more compassionate and peaceful note. After all, Islam means peace and submission, and compassion, in fact, is the very essence of Islam. Well, the essence of God, one could say. It's the compassionate is one of the names of God, and as a Muslim, we're supposed to reflect the qualities of God, the beautiful attributes of God, and compassion certainly is one of them. Wouldn't you like to elaborate a little bit on that?
What I was thinking of when you were talking about the names of God is this idea of 99 names of God. And as you know, many Muslims will even use a rosary with 33 beads to name the 99 names of God as they go around. And this is an important reflection. A lot of the things actually we've talked about today have to do with names of God. God as Al-Adl, as the just, God as As-Salam, as peace, and as you said, God as Ar-Rahman, which is compassion, but it's a fascinating name, as all these ideas are. It's actually connected to the womb. The womb is Ar-Rahm.
Yes.
And so this is, if you will, almost a female name of God.
Yes.
And it appears in front of 113 of the 114 surahs. There it is, God as Ar-Rahman and Ar-Rahim. Both of these words connected to the compassion that a mother feels for her children. So that's a definition of compassion. The word compassion, what does it mean? We don't really think about it in those terms, and this is a very concrete sense of what compassion means.
And you said it's connected. It's connected, why? How? The root is in it?
It's connected, the root, the words are the same.
Yes.
Rahman and Rahm are the very same root in Arabic.
Rahm means womb.
Means womb.
And Rahman means compassionate.
Correct.
Yes.
Right. So we have these very, very physical connections that every Arab listening to the Quran when the Prophet recited it would have understood that's the connection, that's the meaning.
Yes. And I think the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, he also said on the very throne of God, this word is written, my mercy overrides my wrath. So mercy, the mercy of God, always is greater, far greater than his anger or anything like that.
Yes. The word mercy itself is one that's found many times in the Quran.
Yeah.
And of course, the Prophet is understood to be the focus of one verse of the Quran. You are a mercy to the worlds.
Yes, beautiful. Well, thank you very much, Jonathan Brockopp, for joining us here on the show. This was very enlightening and inspiring and educational, I'm sure, for our viewers as well. I look forward to seeing you again soon on Matters of Faith. This was it. Thank you very much for watching. Goodbye and until soon.